This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are designing the future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and my guest today has spent over 15 years in the therapy room. After studying hundreds of self-help books, she created a model to decode the hidden patterns driving relationships. Dr. Michaela Renee Johnson is a therapist and the author of the new book, 7 Primal Wounds, Break the Patterns Keeping You Stuck. She blends neuroscience, attachment theory, and real-life grit to show you why you are not broken. Dr. Michaela Renee Johnson, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing so fantastic, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
So, Michaela, we have to start with a fun fact about you. You know, everyone has a fun fact, and your fun fact is that you've read over 700 self-help books. And for someone like me who reads it notoriously slow, my wife makes fun of me, my library doesn't like me. How do you pull off reading 700 books over the course of your life?
Well, first of all, they do make Amazon nowadays. So maybe you don't have to have your library hate you as much. Although I do love a good library. The vibes are so good. To be honest, my mom always said, like, growing up, I was the kid that never accepted anything like as just plain answer. I would always say, but why? But why? And so she was constantly, even before I could read, she was throwing audiobooks my way. She would give me a box of the chicken and a biscuits and an audiobook. And I think it was a really good tactic now looking back, like with young children, that's like the way to go. If you can get a kid to be completely obsessed with a book, you get a lot of free time as a parent. So kudos to my mom. But I think it really started then, a reading rainbow era kind of kid. And it just never stopped. So every time I wanted to learn something, I would go get a book, either from the library or now with the buy now on Amazon. It's dangerous. And recently, I found the advent of AI to be helpful in answering questions and not having to read 600-page books.
Tell me your gateway drug. I know this may be an inappropriate question to ask a psychotherapist, but what was your gateway drug to self-help books? Because I'm sure your mom didn't throw a self-help book your way at that early age. Was there one, maybe it wasn't even the first one, but the one that was like, oh, I need to read more of these?
Honestly, my gateway was that I grew up in a 27-foot fifth wheel with no running water and no electricity. And so it was actually life choices that led me to kind of start to investigate human psychology and why we make the decisions we do and how we end up in the ways we end up and how to better improve our lives.
And so you mentioned this upbringing, but that didn't lead you to therapy right away. You were in marketing and a marketing director, and then made this pivot before the word pivot was cool. What was it about changing careers at that point in your life that was so appealing that you felt like this was the right path for you to set your feet on?
So believe it or not, I actually started working in media. So I worked for newspapers as a typesetter when I was very young. And then I started working for some of the bigger newspapers like the San Jose Mercury News. And then I went to work for CBS Viacom in media. And that was when I really started to realize, there was a lot more money in sales and marketing than there was in journalism. And so I was always a writer, but I moved into sales and marketing and I realized, well, to be good at sales and marketing, you really need to understand the psychology of humans. So that drove me into, well, maybe I'll just go get a master's degree in psychology after a bachelor's degree in journalism. So it was kind of this progression that actually did make sense if you were on the train with me. But to the outsiders looking in, it might have seemed a little bit, paradoxical or odd.
And so why, because I think you cut your teeth with sort of like family therapy, couples therapy. Why did you decide to put your eggs in that basket?
Honestly, I started out working with kids, believe it or not, and it was really hard on my human emotional side. Like I really struggled kind of seeing that side of things. I even incorporated at first EGALA, which is using equines for therapy and pet assisted therapy. So I had a greyhound that I took through the process. I was volunteering at hospitals, and now I have an Aussie that's been through the pet assisted therapy program. So I was kind of trying to incorporate animals into the children's side of it to make it a little bit easier or more palatable emotionally. And I really started to realize it wasn't the kid's fault. It was the parents' fault. And so I did a brief stint in psychiatrics. I worked actually as a 5150 responder in the hospitals, which was really fascinating dynamics to kind of the more severe of the psychiatric side of mental health. And then started working with couples. And there are it's a unique kind of therapist that can sit in a room with couples that are fighting and screaming at one another and no, you didn't, nuh-uh, uh-huh, like as if they're toddlers or teenagers. And I started to just see these patterns playing out. And I'm like, okay, I have to better understand what is happening here because it doesn't matter who I'm sticking in this room. The themes are the same over and over and over again. And that's really what led me into the Seven Primal Wounds book.
Nice. And so here's a fun fact for me. For many years, I thought 5150 was only a Van Halen album. But apparently it's a psychiatric hold. And that when I made that connection, I was like, man, that is a scary jump there.
Right? Now you know why they probably named it that.
Absolutely. So I want to get to primal wounds, but I want to start talk broad strokes about relationships, which you've been working with for a long time. And I remember seeing this Simon Sinek quote about and I'm sure you've seen it. It was the toothpaste problem. If a couple are fighting about someone forgetting to put the cap on a toothpaste, the fight's not about the toothpaste, it's about something else. And you write about that. Most relationship fights are not about those surface issues we talk about, whether it's something silly as taking out the garbage or taking the kids to class for something. What's really happening underneath when couples argue about the silly things like the toothpaste and the trash?
First of all, I love Simon Sinek. I think he's got so many fantastic YouTubes and things like that. He's a brilliant guy. In terms of couples, what I really started to see was there was always something underneath the surface layer of the onion. And typically, it's an activation of a primal wound. So when you're a child, you start to formulate a narrative like, I'm not good enough. And then as a teenager, it becomes, I'm never going to be good enough. And then as an adult, you paradoxically will pick people and situations that affirm that narrative because you're comfortable with it. You know how to feel not good enough. And so you throw yourself into that situation over and over and over again. And these really become these hot stove moments. And so the mental body brain works the exact same way as the physical body does. So if you touch a hot stove, you're immediately going to pull your hand off of it and you're going to remember that moment. You're going to actually store that data deep in your brain so that the next time you're around this crazy thing known as the stove, you know how to navigate it without getting burned. And we do the same thing in our relationships. We have these little hot stove moments and we store data about it. And then as we get older, we start to avoid the stove altogether. So that's when we start to see people withdraw. They'll become, avoidant or anxious avoidance. We start to see all the attachment disorders that we've read about and things like that. And eventually it creates a lack of intimacy. It creates a lack of connection. And it's not just our intimate relationships either. It's really any relationships that have the ability to affect us. And a big one that I'll see that is sometimes not even considered is the one with your boss or the people that you work with. Because on a very fundamental level, your job, your career affects, your hierarchy of needs, right? Your finances, your food, your housing. And so you'll start to have these same kind of patterns and reactions with people that you even work with.
That's great. And I think we have a language problem in our culture nowadays because we throw around words so willy nilly, and there are a few that really really make you uncomfortable. And when people throw the word like anxiety, like they'll be like, "Oh, I've got this thing at work, and I'm feeling anxiety over it." I'm like, "No, you're not. That's stress. There's a difference between stress and anxiety. The other is trauma. Oh, I've had this. My day today was really traumatic. No, it wasn't. It was a rough day. So and then you use the word wounds when you talk about it. So tell me about where you come from with your training, working with clients, working with people. The idea of words being very important in explaining how you're actually feeling.
This was actually one of the biggest struggles that we came up against in kind of finalizing the title for the book. The framework is based on these seven primal wounds, but I was very nervous to put that term out there because as a therapist, how I show up is I'm not a fan of labels. Like, I think labels actually allow people to stay stuck in a victim mindset. Like the woe is me kind of world that we want to live in. And so when clients will come to me and say, oh, I've got this, this anxiety disorder, this depressive disorder, I said, that's great. And how is that data and that information benefiting you? Like, in what way is that label actually helping propel you to where you want to go in your life? And, sometimes we can use labels or diagnoses to help get to like a deeper place in our recovery or our self growth. But often I find it just helps people stay stuck. And so I like to move through that. And so when we talk about the term wounds, the big thing that I explain to people in the book is a paper cut is also a wound. And so when we're looking at, severity, we kind of have to consider on the scale that it could be as something as small as a paper cut. And yes, it has an effect on us, but we also have the ability to heal and recover and move on from that very well.
And let's dig into wounds, pardon the pun here, but like, how do you help someone identify their core wound? And I'm sure there are many people that have several wounds, but like, there's usually one thing that sort of like splinters off and causes more wounds. How does that happen without turning it into blame towards towards the patient?
Yeah. So when I first started this process, I was kind of doing like these real life, real time assessments where I was noticing the patterns, writing them down, seeing the repeaters, which were the pre activations and then the activations. And I started to see the themes. Eventually, I developed a personality quiz that people can actually take, and it helps you. It's a 70-question quiz, and it helps you identify exactly what your dominant wound is. And then once you know what the wound is, it's this aha light bulb moment for most of my clients and people that I've interacted with, even friends and family that have done it, where it's like, oh my gosh, when I think back on every major fight that I've ever had, or every time when I've really felt hurt by someone, that was exactly what was underneath it. So I felt insignificant, or I felt unlovable. I felt powerless, these different wounds that activate. I do find that there are patterns from childhood that help one wound become more dominant. So, for example, if you grew up in a family system with a parent or a sibling that was very sick or ill, you're predisposed to have the powerless wound. So you always felt like there was nothing that you could do to help that individual that you loved. And the downside, the maladaptive side of the powerless wounders is that they often become hyper controlling. So they become the helicopters in their own life, right? Like, I don't want anybody to be hurt. I don't want but how it looks to everybody else is like, can you back off? Like, you're suffocating me. And so these are how these patterns play out. And it's really fascinating stuff. In families that had high perfectionism, high obsession with like doing things right, getting it done properly, usually highly religious homes, I see a lot of the I am inadequate wounders, and which is the not good enough. And so nothing was ever enough. And so I kind of walk into my relationships expecting that I'm a failure, expecting I'm not going to do it right. It can be something as simple as I'm driving down the road and the person next to me says, "Hey, could you slow down and back off that car? You're falling a little too close," and boom, I'm activated in that, what, I'm not a good enough driver? Like, what, you want me to pull over? Right? Like, it's crazy how we see these things play out. It's really fascinating.
And one of the things I find that as humans we're really good at is overcorrecting. Like, instead of like slight improvements, and this is societal, this is political, this is cultural, that we never want to just kind of like move the pendulum a little bit. It's got to go to the complete opposite direction. How do you remedy these wounds without overdoing it, overcorrecting the problem?
Right. I mean, I will often tell people, let's not peg the other end. Like, we might have full acceleration. We don't need to slam on the brakes. Like, that's just a lot. And so I'll say, like, we're looking at things in life on a 1 to 10 for most areas of our life. And we're looking, if you're currently operating at a 5, we're trying to move to a 6, not to a 10, right? Like, we're looking for tiny, tiny movements. And the thing is when you really realize fundamentally you're not broken, fundamentally you're working very well, then it kind of stops that mindset of, oh my gosh, I need to do a complete 180, like, I've got to completely redo my life. um Ironically, for my incapable wounders, that's really the not smart enough type folks, where they're not going to raise their hand unless they think they have all the information. They're the people that have binders and stick-it notes and tabs. And, if you ask them to like change the car insurance, they're going to take 3 months to do it. And you're going to be annoyed. Like, why are you procrastinating? It's not that they're procrastinating. It's that they need to take a super long time to make sure they have all the information and make a good decision, right? So the wound can actually be very beneficial. So we don't want to shut it off. We don't want to flip the other way, because in its best form, it actually helps you succeed. If you're an insignificant wounder, you probably have tackled some really cool stuff in your life. You've probably done some pretty impressive public speaking opportunities where you've impacted and changed lives from that drive to feel significant. If you're an undeserver, you probably have a nonprofit that you're running because you haven't felt deserving in your life. And so you're giving back in that way. So these wounds all come with a very positive attribute. So that's the other way that I say, let's not 180 this. Like, let's just work within where we're at.
Mentioning some of those high achievers, whether it's like people that are leaders of companies, whether they're public speakers, is there a wound that is often seen amongst that group that comes up of the seven? Or maybe it's two, but like, is there one that you constantly see popping up when it comes to folks that are these sort of higher profile individuals?
Yeah, your Instagram influencers probably more often than not have the "I am insignificant" primal wound. Your TikTok people and all that. Your really high level achieving successful CEOs are probably incapable primal wounders, which is really interesting. So it's fascinating to me. The COO levels, the operational guys, they're usually an inadequate wounder. So there is definitely themes that have presented themselves, and I've worked with so many clients now at this point that I have some pretty good data about what I'm seeing. So it's been really exciting, and I'm actually super excited to see where my research ends up going, because I think there's going to be, like a lot like love languages, the 5 love languages, we're going to see more coming from this as people start to identify these wounds and really understand that there's so much to it.
That's great. I want to try to translate some of your language, and that is, you mentioned a couple times, is activations and pre-activations. For the people not as bright as you, aka me, what does that mean? Pre-activations and activations.
Sure, when you get triggered.
Okay.
Yeah, so when something triggers you, that's an activation. And really what it is, and when I say activation, I'm talking about an activation of the central nervous system that's creating a fight, flight, fawn, or freeze response in some way. And usually what it looks like in the body is you get a little tingly, you get a little sweaty, you start to clench your jaw, you feel dizzy, you feel like you got to puke, those kinds of things. There's actual body response that happens when you look at the emergency response system in the body. What's really impressive is things even like appetite gets suppressed. People will say, "Oh, I feel like I gotta go to the bathroom." That's your body saying, "Dump it, because we need to be prepared for the saber tooth," kind of a situation. And so I actually do help people identify the body's response first. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a great book called Body Keeps the Score. And that is a trauma informed, but his work is fantastic. And it is true. Our body does keep the score. It remembers. And so when you get activated, everybody kind of has a different response. I go very vasovagal. So what that means for me is a fainting goat, right? Like I get eerie calm. And when I get too eerie calm, I become incapable of functioning as well. And so when you start to notice your emergency response system, you can recognize it really early on. It's the brake lights on the freeway up ahead before you have to slam on the brake.
And that's the pre-activation.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Now, I often talk to folks like yourself and high profile people, and many of you subscribe to the good for thee, not for me philosophy, as in like, do as I say, but I'm not going to do what I say. So tell me about how you follow wounds, identifying your wounds day to day, how it works with your personal life, your professional life. Tell me how the fact that you know all this stuff, do you follow it? Does it help you? Tell me how it impacts you on your day to day.
I'll tell you, I didn't get this far in my life trying to fix everybody else. I got this far in my life trying to fix myself, right? So for me, I've actually shared stuff on social media to explain pre-activations and activations, how they happen. And a big, large bulk of the following didn't get it. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, why are you cussing at that person?" or whatever. And, I'm trying to demonstrate how quickly humans will devolve and when we're activated. And so I certainly am not in a position to be flipping that switch off because I know better than that. But I have gotten very good at recognizing my own pre-activations and my own activations. And I actually do walk through the primal reset. It's kind of funny. One of the core editors for the book that this book, I actually texted her the other day and I said, "You would be so proud of me. I walked through my own reset." Like, because it really does. It's one of those things where we're prone to feeling left out. We're prone to feeling abandoned. We're prone to feeling, embarrassed, all these shame, right? Guilt. So when we are activated in those really core places, we will respond from the primal place. It's going to happen. And so recognizing your own activation and then being able to do your own repair is a really important part of it. So one of the things that I teach people is we will devolve to a particular age or a particular place based upon what experience we're having in that moment. So, for example, you might devolve to a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old and get teary and withdraw, or you might devolve to a teenager, the primal teenage response, which is kind of the eye roll and the slamming of the door and the whatever, that kind of attitude. Or you'll devolve to a parent, and it may not seem like that's a de-evolution, but it actually is, where we get real ruminating, very judgmental, very critical, like, you should have known better. What an idiot. Like, the tone that's real condescending. And so when you find yourself activated, the first question you really have to ask is, who is showing up? Like, how am I activated? Because what I'll see within couples a lot is wife gets activated and husband tries to give her a hug. Well, she's activated in a teenage part of self that does not want to be touched. She wants to be left alone, and he's like, "I'm trying to hug her. I don't understand." And it's like, well, yeah, no, this is not the hugging vibe. Like, what is wrong with you right now? So when you start to recognize who is showing up, you can actually do repairs a lot more effectively as an individual and with your partner.
Let's talk about that sort of like balance of the work-life balance issue that people have been talking about ad nauseum for the last 5 or 6 years. But since the idea of like a severance-like chip isn't allowed to separate yourself, your work self, from your life, from your for life self, because they're going to commingle no matter what you do, no matter what that work-life balance. If you have a bad day at work, you may bring it home, or vice versa. Tell me how seven wounds show up differently in romantic relationships versus work dynamics.
Well, the activations and the pre-activations are the same. So someone will say something that makes you feel undeserving, powerless, damaged, not good enough, like you're an outsider, like you're insignificant or inadequate. So the whatever somebody has said or done, or the situation you put yourself in, activates the wound, and the response actually ends up being the exact same. Whether it's your boss, coworkers, or your wife, or your mom, your dad, it doesn't really matter.
Okay, cool. And how about in terms of like giving yourself grace? Like, we're all going to make mistakes, and there are the people out there that'll be either too hard on themselves or not hard enough. Again, the classic overcorrection. What do you talk when you talk to people, right, about, like, tell me about the idea of like giving yourself a break sometimes.
It takes a certain level of emotional maturity to be able to move through that. The shame that can come up can become a woe is me mindset, which allows you to think everyone's against you or nobody understands you, right? Or the reverse of that is like, screw them, I don't need them anyway, right? We take that kind of tough guy attitude as well. So it takes a certain level of emotional maturity to even be able to tap into a space to give yourself grace. And I actually think that even better than trying to do that yourself, because truthfully, in the work I do, very few people are actually able to do that. It's better to have a good friend or, a therapist or a life coach that you can kind of process some of this stuff with, that can actually look at the situation from a third party lens, zoom out a little bit, and give you a different perspective. Because once you've seen something, it is hard to unsee it, even if it's a creation in your mind. So if I've decided that it's super hot today and I'm grumpy about that and I'm sweating and I'm miserable, it's going to be really hard for me to think like, gosh, remember how you felt when it was pouring rain and snowing outside and slushy and you wanted the sun so bad, right? Like, it's really hard to shift that mindset once you've decided how you want to feel about something. So I actually think having someone else can be better for that.
And tell me about this sort of hybrid approach that you take of like neuroscience and attachment theory. Why is understanding the brain part of it, critical for the emotional change?
Because we can't stop the brain. It's just way too powerful. It's way too intelligent and it's way too old. When we look at the amygdala, right? Like people call it the lizard brain or the caveman brain. It's existed for thousands and thousands of years, and you're really not going to be very effective at rewriting it, at least not recoding it. So you can rewire it a little bit if you're aware of what's going on. And that's where understanding the wound, understanding your attachment patterns, understanding, to quote Eric Berne, transactional analysis, those parts of self that we kind of tap into gives you like this superpower. It really does. It makes you uh, far advanced in terms of how the old lizard brain is functioning.
And how do you use that without it being a cop out? Like, oh, I'm only doing that because that's the way I'm wired. I can't do anything about that. I know the science, and the science says I can't change because that's the way I'm wired.
I love my favorite thing to do with people that are resistant in that way is, and how's that working out for you? Right? Like I just punt the question back. Is that working out in all your relationships? Or do you want to have a different experience? I'm a big fan of the punt.
You write about in the book that you're not broken. If someone only remembers one thing from this book, what do you want that sentence to mean for them?
Your body is doing exactly as it was intended to do. And once you realize how to utilize that, you can turn it into a superpower.
She's Dr. Michaela Renee Johnson. The book, 7 Primal Wounds, Break the Patterns Keeping You Stuck. Michaela, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Joe. This was awesome.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Dr. Michaela and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.